Hey, what's up? Zach here, and I'm at the roller coaster capital of the world here, Cedar Point, and I have just spent the last 48 hours in the Nike Motiva, and here are all the things I have learned about them that you need to know before you decide if you're gonna buy them or not. Here we go. Now remember, the Nike Motiva is marketed as primarily a walking shoe or a casual lifestyle shoe. However, on their website, they do say that you can take this out jogging. There are a lot of pitfalls to that, especially with rocker construction shoes, especially with the non-regular mid and outsole. However, the first thing I noticed about these that really kind of set them apart from some other, especially walking shoes, is the uppers. And the biggest thing you gotta know about the uppers in the Motiva is just how comfortable they are. For sure, in terms of Nike's running lineup this year, these have been the most comfortable uppers by far I have put on. That is including the Invincible Run 3s. And the thing I like most about the uppers is just how buttery they feel. There's really no break-in with these whatsoever. And the weave is just a little bit more elastic, a little bit more forgiving on these. However, because the tongue is so aggressively gusseted in the Motivas, you still feel like you've got a lot of containment in the uppers. Now the lace line is reinforced with plastic going all the way up. You do get a runner's knot in these because remember Nike says you can jog in them. I will say in terms of lockdown, they feel a lot like the Invincible Run 3, and just the shape of the uppers in general feel a lot like the Invincible Run 3. I really like that the lace line does have a little bit of a garage that goes through the tongue on these. A lot of times these running shoe companies will not put anything that will hold the tongue and the lace line together. And number one, what that does is that keeps the tongue straight on your foot so it doesn't start diving medial or lateral on your foot and start to annoy you. But also it just makes the lockdown a little bit better because everything is more uniform. And if you look at the breathability test on these, I just did the airflow map on them. They did heat up 105.8 degrees, then cooled down another 57.2 degrees. But if you look at that airflow map of them, you do actually get a decent amount of breathing here in the very distal tip of the forefoot. That knit does allow some airflow through there. It's just not a really rapid airflow. So if you're walking in these and not someone using them to run, you're not gonna heat them up fast enough. You're not gonna get the opportunity to heat them up fast enough, I should say. That's because the uppers are so light and accommodating. I really think, you know, even though they did heat up over 100 degrees, I still think they'd be just fine, especially for walking. The only thing you gotta watch out for when you have that buttery of an upper is if you look at the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Yeah, the burr does start to make a pretty decent impression on these. However, remember, these are walking shoes. They're not meant to be running through thick brush. I will say though, to blunt containment, I would have liked these to have just a little bit more foxing on the uppers, a little bit more reinforcement, just because, like I said, the non-uniform mid and outsole on these, that is where you're gonna start to get into the, are you gonna buy them or not? And I think that does, it kind of involve the uppers, but we'll talk about that once we get into the mid and outsole. And getting into the midsole teardown, this is what I was most interested in, mainly because, you know, Nike markets these pistons they have that are made of their midsole foam. Kind of wanted to see what they look like. Now, if you look at the Motiva on the midsole teardown, you'll notice there's not much going on here. This is an entire bed of Cushlon 3.0. And I actually got a really good look at it under the microscope because there is a little bit of an imperfection in the foam. So you can see kind of how cavernous that Cushlon 3.0 is. And then when you see the more uniform portion of it on the microscope, you see kind of how it looks almost a little more plasticky than Cushlon did. So that's pretty interesting, kind of showing you where that foam is going from the first iteration of it. Now here it's the latest iteration of it. Now the one thing you'll notice is there is no shank on the Motiva, which I think is a little bit of an issue because the Cushlon line of foams are so soft. The other thing you'll notice is the rocker in these is really far posterior, kind of like the Keen Walk 400, which was another rocker sole shoe I reviewed earlier this year. Now the thing with the Keens is that they have a nylon shank that is top loaded that keeps them really springy and really makes the shoes move like locomotive wheels, whereas the Motiva, you kind of sink into the heel and then that rocker just kind of pumps your arch up, right? And so as the shoe is new, or if you were a very lightweight person, that rocker is gonna work very gently and very nice. If you're a heavier person, you could just sink right into the foam here in the heel, and then that could lead to other issues like heel pain, Achilles pain, things like that. So I think it really depends on what kind of body habit you are, kind of what you already have going on, and kind of what your doctor says, if these are going to be right for you, which we'll get into in the fit section. But suffice to say, unlike some rockers that are meant to be, like I said, like a locomotive wheel, they're meant to kind of be, I know King calls it their constant curve, whereas in Nike's case, these are meant more for you to sink into. Now, because that rocker is so far posterior, these are going to be a lot more stable than some other rocker soled shoes, where it's more distal or more towards the forefoot of the shoe. So you still have a decent landing pad here on your forefoot to kind of give you a little more tactile sensation. The only thing is those, you know, those pistons they talk about, really they're just undulations in the foam, right, in strategic areas. So those actually got compressed for me after an hour or two, right, because I'm a heavier dude. So, you know, as I'm coming down them, that cush line just starts to bottom. So I noticed at first those pistons, or, you know, those undulations, I should say, and they weren't the most stable things on the planet. The ones on the lateral side did give you just a little bit of like almost like a blocker, right? So when you came down and you were loading laterally as you walk, like a walker's gait, you load lateral, then you push off medial. I noticed that the loading lateral was just a little bit more springy, right? So your step was just a little bit more of an oomph to it. But then after an hour, that just all went away. So I'd say if you want that action, you better be a lighter walker or runner. Otherwise, like I said, this is gonna more compress down to more of a uniform sole, and that rocker is gonna become just more of an elevated arch for you over time. If you look at that Cushlon 3.0 on the bounce height test, got 30 centimeters in the heel, 36 in the forefoot. I think the reason it didn't do so well in the heel is because it is a rocker, so you have to move the shoe back as you put the ball bearing down on it. So you're not getting, you know, the flat soled shoes, right? You can utilize, you know, the ground reactive forces, where in this you can't. So, you know, Cushlon 3.0 has a decent amount of bounce for just how soft and shock absorbing it is. It is still more of a primarily shock absorbing foam in my opinion, but still pretty decent for what it is. But two of the most important features of the midsole actually come in the periphery of it. Number one is just how wide the heel is on these. These almost look, like I said, the invincible run 3s, like I said about the uppers, but same in the midsole. It does have a really big landing pad there on the heel, because most of walking, remember, you start in a heel strike, unlike a lot of runners, which go midfoot or forefoot striking. So with these, they really want you to have a nice wide stable base, which I really did appreciate, especially with a shoe with a rocker that can get a little bit more unstable than some others. The other thing is you can see this giant cutout here on the lateral side. That is to allow for more uniform compression of the foam. And on the medial side, it's just a little bit more bulged out, and that's just to give it a little bit more oomph when you're coming down on the medial side of your foot for your push-off. So really everything about this foam setup is to allow the Cushlon 3.0 to compress in a way that's going to be more comfortable for you during a walking gait. And getting into the outsole tread, this is just a rippling wave pattern that starts here in the medial heel and goes up into the junction of the mid and forefoot. Then you have a block pattern in the heel as well as in the forefoot. This is pretty nice because it transitions steps so well, and these waves kind of almost mimic, you know, how the shoe is going to be moving. Plus you got this pretty decent break points in the heel and in the forefoot. So transition step, it is pretty darn easy in the Motiva. The one thing is the rubber is very thin, and if you look at the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, the burr almost gets down to the extent of the tread depth. So like I said, these are meant for an easier transition step. They're meant for a smoother gait, so you shouldn't be producing as much friction in these as you would maybe a standard running shoe. So I think Nike is banking on the fact that these are going to be more biomechanically efficient to produce a little bit more durability versus the rubber compound itself. And if you look at the speed ratio of the Motivas, comes in at a 2.67, which isn't terrible. It's not nearly what Nike's better running shoes come in at. But remember, these are walking shoes, and the efficiency, or I should say the quote unquote speed you get from these, should be in how fluid they get from one step to the next. The fit of the Motiva though is something I really appreciated being in them for the last 48 hours, especially pounding pavement for that long. Narrow, medium, wide foot, and just go true to size. If you are really narrow, especially if you don't have a super long foot, they can go down a half size on these because of how elastic the uppers are. And in terms of the snake bitten foot, these really do have a lot of caveats to them because number one, if you have very stiff ankles, if you're someone that really can't move your ankle very well, these are going to take a lot of pressure off that and do a lot of the dorsiflexion and plantar flexion for you. So that's a really good use case of these. However, if you're somebody that has a lot of stiffness, let's say in the Achilles tendon, these are going to almost make that more stiff because they don't allow you to go through a natural range of motion with them. So if you're someone prone to that, then you might just want to stick with something with more of a standard sole, because over time, you might notice that that gets more stiff when you're in a regular shoe. Now, if you're somebody with heel pain, ball of foot pain, it kind of is dealer's choice. You really probably should be consulting with a doctor before you get into a rocker soled shoe, because some people are gonna like, especially in the Motiva with the Cushlon 3.0, some people are gonna like sinking into that, having all that plush foam to come down on, whereas others, it's gonna be too much, it's gonna be too soft, especially with the rocker pushing you forward with that. So there really is no one size fits all to the Motiva. I will just say that an orthotic in these is going to help keep it more of a stiff rocker, but like I said, that's gonna make your foot a little bit more stiff. Or let's say you're a chronic ankle sprainer, the fact that they're a rocker as well as a non-uniform sole, you're just gonna be a little bit unstable for you. I probably wouldn't recommend these if you are someone in that category. But if you are somebody with ball of foot pain, they're gonna take a ton of pressure off of the ball of your foot, someone that's coming back from stress fracture, neuroma, things like that. These are gonna be really nice because they center all of the pressure kind of right below the ankle and into that where that rocker is, kind of a little bit more midfoot to posterior midfoot and heel. I think in terms of the primary foot conditions that these treat the best, it is gonna be more ankle arthritis. In terms of the rear foot, snake bites, lumps and bumps, heel pain, tendonitis, things like that, I'd say talk to a doctor in terms of the way forefoot and the way back and the ankle. That's where I think they do their best work. And that fit profile really brings me to the performance of the Motiva. I will say these were a real asset being in these for this long, for these like last 2 days being at the park. We stay over here at Lighthouse Point, which are all these cabins on the lake, and then you come into the park. And that's a pretty decent walk into the park, through the park and then back. And I will say, typically for me, if I'm going from flat sole to rocker and then back, my back can start to hurt a little bit. With these though, because they compress so well, I really never got any of that back pain. These were very accepting. And with me, I'm holding my kid on my shoulders a lot nowadays, and having that nice, huge stack of foam to sink my feet into was really nice, having all that weight on my shoulder. Over time, like I said, that's just gonna start to bottom, and you might get some abnormal wear. Your heel might sink into these. So I think in terms of a shoe, if you know you're gonna be walking around a long time, maybe you keep one of these new and you wear them for that trip, because yeah, your walking efficiency is really exceptional in these, especially when you're putting in high miles in one single go, right? Like you're on your feet all day for one extended period of time. So I think to me that was kind of the best use case of these. If you're gonna be wearing these for kind of extended times in terms of days and months, like I said, get ready for this foam to start bottoming pretty darn quick. To me, these are not jogging shoes. I know Nike markets them as that. I think once they bottom, they become a little bit better of a jogging shoe, but like I said, if you have any bit of instability whatsoever, you may find yourself having to pay a lot more attention to every strike that maybe you don't want to be. So to me, if you're gonna get a running shoe, get a running shoe. If you want a walking shoe, then like I said, these are fine for walking. It's just, to me, I'm not sure I'd be intermixing them with these, but for what their main marketing is to get you, really good efficiency for really unforgiving walking conditions, sure, they're fantastic. But of course, I'd love to know your thoughts on the Motiva. Are you looking to pick up a pair of rocker sole walking shoes, or just staying with your standard, more flat sole traditional shoes? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to check out another pair of similar walking shoes, a little bit more of a resilient midsole setup, kind of the antithesis to Cushlon 3.0, the Keen Walk 400, make sure you click into this video up above, subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.